Welcome back, everyone, to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined as always by Scott Karasik. And tonight we are joined by none other than the czar of the playbook, Emory Hunt of Football Gameplan. You guys know him on Twitter at FBall Gameplan. He's the hardest working guy in the draft process year in, year out. Welcome back to the show, Emory.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. When I'm on the show, that must mean is draft time, you know?
Yes. So we're coming
definitely.
at you on the eve of free agency, even though free agency, the frenzy has started with the tampering period going on as we've spoken, and a lot of guys have signed contracts. But tomorrow there will be officially free agency will start. But we're going to talk a little bit tonight about how some of these bigger free agent moves that have already occurred may impact the draft. We'll also get Emory's thoughts on maybe some guys that he likes that are maybe flying under the radar, because Emory is known quite a bit for not necessarily buying into the groupthink. So he will offer some interesting perspectives on us. And of course, we will always answer you guys' mailbag questions. As we do on this show, almost every episode, we start off by talking about any roster moves that the Falcons have made. They have made a bunch of minor re-signings. I know there are a lot of disappointed Falcon fans out there wishing that the Falcons had made some big splash move, but we'll start the show off by talking about some of those things. And the moves that we're talking about, let me look them up. The Falcons have re-signed Ricardo Allen and Ben Garland. Both those guys are restricted free agents. Both of them got the second-round tender at $2.9 million. And they also gave one-year contracts to Bleedy Ray Wilson, Leon McFadden, and Austin Pastor. We'll kick things off with a mailbag question from NJ Falcons Ronan at Mave2124 on Twitter. He asks, I need your thoughts on 1, giving Garland a second-round RFA tender, 2, re-signing Leon McFadden, and 3, Taylor Gabriel going to Chicago. So, Scott, why don't you start us off?
1, Garland getting a second-round RFA tender, I understand, and free agency is probably looking at $2.5 million a year as a interior depth guy with how bloated that market's going to look. So giving him a 2.9 for 1 isn't a bad deal. Re-signing McFadden, it's a minimum move. Who gives a damn? I don't think he makes the 53-man. Turbo going to Chicago, that's the part that sucks. He's awesome, but I could see a situation where he didn't like his role in the offense and he just wants a better role, and he'll get that in Chicago.
Emory, did you have any thoughts on any of these moves? Obviously, they're low-key signings on the Falcons, and so we don't expect you to have deep insights in RFA tenders and whatnot. But at least with Taylor Gabriel, he was a big part of the Falcons' offense 2 years ago, sort of was underutilized this past season, and now is going to be a part of that Matt Nagy Chicago's offense, maybe fill that role as a Tyreek Hill type of player if you're looking for analogs of how they used in Kansas City. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's tough because you look at a guy like Gabriel who had a huge breakout in Atlanta, only to go missing last season, it seems like. So I understand him moving on, but I also like the Ricardo Allen signing because I think he's one of those underrated players. They like to call them the glue guys that you need on the team. I just was a big fan of his game coming out of Purdue. I'm glad he's been able to stick. He had a really good week at the East-West Shrine game, stuck on with the Falcons, played both corner safety type hybrid. He's more of a safety now, but you hope guys like that can continue to find their niche and continue to have a role in the league. And I just hope when Gabriel goes to Chicago, he fits right on in that slot. Now they have 2 tight ends. They have Tariq Cohen, 2 good wide receivers, and we'll see what they'll do in the draft. Maybe they address it again with another big-time receiver when they do get on the clock.
Yeah, they're picking 8th overall, so they will certainly have their option of probably position players, just because we expect a lot of quarterbacks to go high in the draft, and that should allow maybe some of the top 3 or 4 position players at multiple positions, including wide receiver, maybe a cornerback or something like that, maybe a pass rusher. So the Bears are really sort of sitting pretty with some of the upgrades that they've made this so far in the offseason. They went out and got Allen Robinson. They went out and got Trey Burton. So they're certainly surrounding Mitchell Trubisky with a lot of talent on that offense, and I think Taylor Gabriel will fit in very well there. I'm glad he's going to get that opportunity to succeed in Chicago that I don't think he really got this past season in Atlanta. As for the other moves that Maeve asked about, the Garland tender, having the second round tender was a mild surprise just because given how tight the Falcons cap situation is, you would have thought they would have given him the original round tender and maybe saved $1 million there. But I think they were really wanting to make sure that Garland would return to the team this year because he's a valuable depth piece. He's definitely our best backup offensive lineman, and I don't think the Falcons really wanted to lose him in that regard. McFadden was a mild surprise just because he was on the team briefly at the end of last season, was inactive for every game that he was with the team, and you would have assumed that the Falcons would have tried to move on. But obviously they're trying to shore up their cornerback depth towards the back end of the roster. They still might wind up drafting a young guy in the draft to sort of push McFadden or replace him. So we'll see how that shakes out. But certainly some interesting moves as the Falcons continue to focus on retaining their depth. And as you said, Ricardo Allen being a solid starter for the team. So let's jump into the free agency talk. And, Emory, I know you've been talking quite a bit about this because everybody seems to be talking quite a bit about this, but let's talk about the quarterbacks and how this offseason is one where we are expecting a lot of quarterback movement. We saw a lot of quarterbacks signed today in free agency. You got the Jets going out and re-signing Josh McCown. They added Teddy Bridgewater. The Cardinals wound up paying for both Mike Glennon and Sam Bradford, which is baffling to me. But the Broncos wound up getting Case Keenum. Of course, the Vikings wound up landing Kirk Cousins. I know you have some interesting thoughts on where these top 5 or 6 quarterbacks are in this draft class, and so we'll get to that later. But looking at some of these free agent signings, particularly with not Cousins, but the other ones, do you think those moves help those teams immediately and potentially move the needle to make them, particularly got teams like the Jets and Broncos who are going to be picking in the top 5 or 6 picks, to basically spurn the quarterback position at the top of the draft?
Tough, because I think when you look at, I think the team that may be in the best position to not take a quarterback because of what they did today will probably be the New York Jets. Re-signing Josh McCown, who played his best season outside of Chicago last year with the Jets, had the Jets competitive, and then he turned it to Josh McCown for stretches, but he played for the most part well. And when he got hurt, that offense really went to where. But also bringing in Teddy Bridgewater. If he is back to where he was, or at least 80% to it, there's your starter right there as a young guy. I think he's 25 years old.
And he's still good.
He's still good. And the last time we saw him play a football game, a real long football game as a starter, they were in the playoffs. So I think that right there could push the Jets to maybe go with an offensive piece outside of quarterback. As far as Denver, yeah, maybe so, but I think the pressure from the Broncos fans and the pressure from the media, even though you're not supposed to listen to that, you're supposed to make decisions based off what's best for the team. I still think they may go with another young guy in the draft, even though they have one they drafted 2 years ago in
Lynch.
Allow that kid to get out there and play. We didn't even know if he's good or not. We don't even know if Christian Hackenberg is good or not. We have an idea, but
Hackenberg sucks, dude. If he can't even get reps in practice, he can't be good.
Well, that's what I was trying to make the case for Giants fans and parts of Giants media out here with Davis Webb. He wasn't even getting reps in practice. That battle in training camp was Geno Smith and Josh Johnson. Geno won out. Johnson got released. And so, I think Denver may be in a position. Case Keenum, you don't know if it was a one-time thing. So I think they may still draft a guy, especially if a guy that Elway likes. I know the people are drawing the comparisons to Baker Mayfield because they are, they coached him at the Senior Bowl, maybe Josh Allen. So that connection is there. But I think that's the closest one out of the two, in my opinion, that are probably still going to take a quarterback despite what they did today.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one, of those two. It does seem like the Jets it'll be interesting to see where they are on Teddy Bridgewater, because I think you're right. In terms of upside, I think you could compare Bridgewater favorably with any of these younger quarterbacks that could be had at the top of the draft. And I think the benefit of adding a guy like Bridgewater is there's not going to be as much pressure on the Jets to try to trade up and get a guy, because I think if they hadn't gone out and gotten Bridgewater, they would feel pressured, particularly with a team like Buffalo, who everybody expects to trade up into the top three, with Cleveland having 2 picks in the top 4, with Denver sitting there at 5. The Jets would be in a position where they might miss out on probably the guy that's the top 2 or 3 guys on their board. But I think with Bridgewater there, they can probably be a little bit conservative and not feel the need to be as aggressive with trading up in the draft, and sort of wait and see if a guy falls to them at 6. And then if a guy they really like falls there at 6, then they can pull the trigger on him. If not, then they can get one of the better position players in the draft at a variety of positions, where the Jets certainly could use help at a lot of position groups, and then maybe see what's there in round 2 later in the draft to see if anybody slides down the board. So, yeah, I think those moves really move the needle. I think the Cardinals basically panicked because they're sitting in the middle of the first round, and they probably thought, oh, nobody's going to slide to us, and we don't want to trade up for a guy. So let's go out there and give Sam Bradford and Mike Glennon a bunch of money to be our 1 and 2. They paid Sam Bradford like he's a starter, so he's going to start for them. And I haven't seen the terms of Glennon's contract, but I'm assuming he's probably one of the higher paid backups in the league. So it would be a little bit perplexing to see them then try to get a quarterback. But, who knows? Maybe someone slides down to them at 15 and they pull the trigger on that. And I agree with you on Denver. I do think the pressure is going to be on them, given where they're picking, that they probably still would pull the trigger on the quarterback if they're right there. So basically, long story short, Minnesota is the only team that really did a great job today with the quarterback position. The Jets would get the silver medal. I guess Denver would get the bronze, and Arizona's just lagging behind. But I do want to talk about the quarterback prospects, Emory, just because I know you have an interesting way that you order these guys. I went and saw your rankings that you posted on YouTube under the Football Gameplan YouTube page. And I know you have a guy at number 1 that a lot of people, or some people, let me not say a lot of people, some people seem to think is not really a quarterback. And then you have another guy that's ranked highly in your rankings over maybe one of these other guys that some people think is going to be a number 1 pick, that I've also seen people not be considered as a quarterback due to his height. And those 2 guys I'm referring to are Lamar Jackson, who's your QB1, and Quentin Flowers from South Florida. Obviously, no one's talking about Quentin Flowers being a high pick, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts on his future? But obviously, I do want to get your thoughts on why you think Lamar Jackson is the best quarterback in this draft class.
It's funny, man, because I'm old enough to remember Vic in college, even played for his offensive coordinator at the time. But when Vic came out of college at Virginia Tech, you had Virginia Tech probably threw the football 13 times a game. And Vic was legit 4-2 runner, drop back, maybe see somebody open, may not even go through the full-fledged read and just take off. And it was the fastest guy on the field. And the talk then was, man, we've never seen a quarterback run a 4-2 with a strong arm, but we can't allow him to fall. It was all projection. He had to go number 1. Because who's going to, defend a quarterback that runs a 4-2 at that position? And you've never seen that before. So it was a no-brainer. The only dude that you could argue going number 1 that year, and rightfully so, was Julius Peppers. Because your defensive end not supposed to be able to line up at free safety and pick off passes, and also start on the basketball team in North Carolina, when starting at North Carolina on the basketball team actually meant something, right? So that was the big argument at the time. So I understood why Vic went first. But now you have a dude that's a more polished passer than Vic, a more agile runner, and not as reckless of a runner as Vic. And also coming out of a pro-style offense. And I've always told people this. We never got to see what Petrino and Vic would have done together in the league because Vic went to jail. but this is what it would have looked like with Petrino and Lamar Jackson. So I'm just glad that we got to see it play out in college. I don't understand why people are not. Well, I kind of understand why, but when you look at Lamar Jackson, polished passer, dynamic rushing ability, he's a touchdown waiting to happen. So when you have a guy like that, you're never in a bad play on offense. You tend to dictate what the defense does for you, does to try to game plan against you, and you really open up the offense for everyone else around you. So we've seen Johnny Manziel get numerous tackles drafted in the top 10 because people thought they were excellent pass protectors, but really they just didn't want to rush upfield because Johnny Manziel was going to take off and run for over 1,500 yards what he did at Texas A&M. So I think Lamar Jackson's the best game breaker in this draft class. And if the way NFL Network and ESPN loves to play these top 10 Vic specials and top 10 Vic runs and top 10 Vic this, why Lamar Jackson isn't the clear-cut number one quarterback prospect is just mind-blowing to me.
I 100% agree. I haven't seen a guy who coming out is as good as a passer with all his other skills, but as good as a passer as Lamar Jackson is, outside of maybe Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson went 12th overall and was obviously the number one quarterback last year. Why wouldn't you have basically the same guy, probably a little bit stronger arm, not as good as reading defenses, but, it's like comparing, I don't know, Peyton Manning reading defenses to Tom Brady reading defenses. I don't think Brady's as good as Manning is reading defenses, but Brady's got other stuff that he does well that makes up for it. So he should go top 3, top 4, not wherever the hell they have him in the middle of the thing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where Lamar Jackson goes. I think it's interesting when you talk about Lamar Jackson playing in that pro-style offense because, a lot of the narrative surrounding Lamar Jackson is whether or not, he projects well to the NFL because, he's a run-first quarterback and all these sort of cliches. And it's interesting to me that that's a question for Lamar Jackson when you just go back a couple of years and you look at some of the scouting reports on Ryan Mallett, who played for Petrino at Arkansas. And like I went back and looked at his Ryan Mallett's NFL.com scouting report. And like in the first 2 paragraphs of that scouting report, the fact that Ryan Mallett, the positive for Ryan Mallett is that he played in a pro-style offense. That's mentioned like 3 or 4 times. And it's like that was a positive for Ryan Mallett and why people liked him because he had the physical tools and played in a pro-style offense. So he was an easy projection. But then when Lamar Jackson comes along, it's all of a sudden like the perception of that whole pro-style offense just completely disappears and it's not considered an asset like it was with other players that played in that Petrino offense. And so it'll be interesting to me with Lamar Jackson where he gets drafted. We talked about some of these quarterbacks being in a position to wait. And I think, whether it's the Jets or the Broncos or even the Cardinals or somebody else, if those teams want to wait and see if Lamar Jackson is there when they pick and then they wind up pulling the trigger on that guy, it would make a ton of sense to me. I think the value of getting some of these veterans is you don't have to feel as pressured to throw Lamar Jackson out on the field immediately. And we could see a team do what the Falcons did when they drafted Vic his rookie year and sort of gave him like a series here or a series there to use his playmaking ability interspersed with what Chris Chandler was doing in the regular offense. And I think, given, Josh McCown's not necessarily a quarterback that you're going to be married to for 4 quarters in a game because you're not expecting him to play at a high level. Same thing, potentially with Case Keenum if you assume that last year was more of a fluke than anything. So I do think there's a strategy that some teams might use. I know some people have talked about him like one of the reasons why you would move Lamar Jackson to wide receiver is because if you had that situation, you can use him like Cordell Stewart was in Pittsburgh when he was, the slash player. But I just think, get him under center, let him use his legs to make plays, and that's going to be way more valuable than him trying to run routes and hoping that the quarterback throws him the football. Get him the ball in his hands and let him do something with it.
Why would you make it hard for him to have the ball in his hands when he's a quarterback that touches the ball every play? Like that part of common sense just falls on deaf ears to many. because I just don't understand why, we're at this point where we've seen how beneficial. Now, and I know this is a Falcons podcast, but imagine if on that last play, right, in the NFC divisional round, if Matt Ryan had Lamar Jackson's athleticism, that play wouldn't have been dead. You know what I'm saying? He would have found a way to keep it alive, even though it was Matt Ryan saw on the backside like, oh my God, this dude fell out, and they was trying to throw the throwback, but they played it perfectly. However, if he had that threat of being able to take off and run, that's an element that you can't game plan for, and I think that's what people miss. That's the value of having someone. You don't have to be Michael Vick or Lamar Jackson. You could be Aaron Rodgers with that mobility, and you still are never in a bad play. Just to answer your second part of your question about Quentin Flowers, the reason why he graded out so high, Sean King did excellent work with him as a sophomore, and going into as a junior. Because prior to that, his freshman and sophomore season, he was super erratic. And then you saw Sean King get there, and he took off, and he became a Heisman candidate. And then this past season, Sean King coached another position. He had another quarterback coach come in, and that's why you saw sort of the up and down play. But what stood out to me was that despite all that, despite his peaks and valleys, a lot of what we see with a guy like Cam Newton, these peaks and valleys within the game. But when he's on, when it seems like, hey, they need this drive to put points up on the board, Flowers constantly answers the call. And I also find it funny that, in this draft, well, let's take it back to last year. Last year, Deshaun Watson had to measure in that 6'2", right? Or, because if you were under 6'2", the amount of quarterbacks that had been successful under 6'2", but this year, Baker Mayfield's 6 feet, no problem at all, right? It's like he's already.
We all know why that was
exactly. And so now, even in the same draft, you have Quentin Flowers, who is 5'10", but apparently, he's too short. He has to move and switch positions. But he's played more consistent football and actually had his team in that American Athletic Conference championship game and won some big games, juxtaposed to another guy that we're talking about that's supposed to go into the top 5, and Josh Allen. So I just think that.
Oh my God, dude, Josh Allen! I could go on a rant on Josh Allen. I've never seen someone get so bonered over a Tom Savage, like I've never seen media get so riled up about a guy who is basically Tom Savage with wheels, or like a poor man's shitty version of Jay Cutler. Like, if you can't dominate the Mountain West Conference, I don't give a fuck about your supporting cast. If you can't dominate the Mountain West Conference and you're supposedly a top 10 pick, how are you going to dominate the NFL?
I mean, think about it. And last year when they were in the Mountain West Championship game, he threw some of the worst interceptions. DeMonte KZ picked off, like, he had a feel. I think he got drafted based off that game, although he was a tremendous player, but he was horrible in that Mountain West Conference Championship game. You saw Quentin Flowers go toe-to-toe with UCF's quarterback in that title game. I want to say he threw 5 touchdowns. So I don't care. I've always said size is not a skill. And he has shown enough to where if you give him good coaching, he's going to play consistent football. So I think he still has a chance, whether that's in the NFL or up north in Canada. It's a little bit more liberal as far as play style is concerned. Quentin Flowers is a quarterback, and it has enough upside to where you can take a chance on him.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the Canada aspect, because I think that sort of stands out, because I feel like with Quentin Flowers being 5'10", he's never going to get the shot in the NFL that he potentially deserves. And I'm with you. Like, I've seen some bad Quentin Flowers. I've seen some very good Quentin Flowers, and it's intriguing. And I do think, 5 years from now, we could be looking at like Quentin Flowers as the best quarterback in Canada in the CFL, and maybe Lamar Jackson being the best quarterback or one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't want to, no slight to the Aaron Rodgerses of the world, but certainly from this draft class, I think we could be looking back and saying that, and saying the 2 best quarterbacks, at least pro quarterbacks, maybe Lamar Jackson and Quentin Flowers, and we'll see what the other guys. Before we move on, I do want to get some of your brief thoughts on some of the other quarterbacks. You've talked about Baker Mayfield, but your thoughts on Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen, who you have right after Lamar Jackson as your best 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I actually like the top 4, Darnold, Rosen, Mayfield in that order. Darnold, I like him because he has that factor that I talked about earlier, where a play is never dead. So he's going to get out of a jam. He's going to find a way to make something happen, and that's all you really ask for. To me, that shows that he's not afraid of pressure, and that's huge. If you're not afraid of pressure, I don't care how you throw, how strong your arm is, or how weak your arm is. I can win with you. That's why I was a big fan of Case Keenum coming out of Houston. I could win with Case Keenum. I could win with a Kellen Moore. I could win with those type of guys, right? So Darnold has the it factor. He still has upside. He's a redshirt sophomore, I believe. So he still has growth left in his game, and I think the game will start to slow down for him as it does as you get older. Rosen, I like his game as well too. The problem with Rosen is that he's more of your what they like to call traditional pocket passer, which means he struggles to get out the way, which means he's going to be a sitting duck. Not as bad as, let's say, one of these old school statues like Johnny Unitas, but more along the lines of an Eli Manning. He has some wiggle with him, but not enough to where he can get out the way consistently. And we've seen Eli Manning take some hellacious shots, either take sacks, throw the ball errantly into the defender's hands. And I see a lot of that with Rosen, and when it's clean, and I love the highlights they show because he's never under duress. The pocket is perfect. And he's like, oh, look at the form. Look at the way his elbows are out, how he throws the ball. Yeah, great, because he has like 9 seconds to do that. But in the NFL, when a game is played in the middle of the field, the pressure comes quicker. You have to be able to think quickly, get rid of the football, or be able to move out the way. And like I said before, you don't have to be Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers. You can be Tom Brady and have good pocket mobility. But Rosen, that worries me about him. And Mayfield is a Case Keenum clone to me. And when you look at Mayfield versus pressure situations, I think that's where he struggles. This is a guy that won the Heisman Trophy. And in that playoff game, you mean to tell me your Heisman Trophy winner, you take the ball out of his hands? They had to run the ball to get back into the game. And in overtime, they was like, you know what, Mayfield, we're going to run the ball to try to win this thing. We don't trust you enough to go out there and win this game for us. Now, also breaking him down from a scouting standpoint, if it's not open, clearly open, or easily defined as open, he's not going to throw it. So he avoids tight windows. In NFL, you always have to throw tight window throws. We saw that down the Senior Bowl. People were, going crazy, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is 7-on-7, and he's afraid to make certain throws unless the guy is wide open. And I think that's the issue because he doesn't trust his ability to fit it in there. And we see this a lot in the Big 12. And I think people don't really understand how important the hash marks are in college. You can't spread the field like that in the NFL. The hash marks are closer. The game is played in the middle of the field. Pressure comes quicker from both sides. And that's when you have to really, get rid of that football and make some stick throws. And we're going to find out pretty quickly if he can do that. So I think that's why I have him fourth, below Darnold and Rosen and Jackson.
I like what you said about Josh Rosen. I like Josh Rosen. He's my QB1 in this draft. But I think part of that is because I've watched Matt Ryan play for a decade, and there's a lot of aspects of Josh Rosen's game that reminds me a lot of what Matt Ryan was when he was at Boston College. And you're right, the whole sort of mobility and being able to move is something that's an issue with his game. But I do feel relatively confident that with development like Matt Ryan, Josh Rosen will be able to use his ability from the neck up to compensate in a lot of ways for that, because Matt Ryan, particularly early in his career, and one of the reasons why the Falcons struggled in the postseason, why the Falcons usually struggled in big games against like their rival, the Saints, things wouldn't go as planned and things would get muddy for Matt Ryan. He would tend to struggle in a lot of ways. That's not been a major issue with him the last couple of years as he's improved and developed in this league. But early on in his career, that was an issue in some of these tougher opponents that he would face. He would struggle with that. And I sort of expect Josh Rosen to go through those same struggles early in his career. But I do think, like Matt Ryan, eventually he'll be able to find his way to compensate for those things and become a high-level quarterback. So we'll see. It's going to be a fun offseason with these quarterbacks. Now, let's talk about the free agent moves that happened today. Again, this is a Falcons podcast, but the Falcons didn't really do anything. So we'll just talk about what happened around the league. A lot of wide receivers got paid a lot of money. And it's interesting. You look at some of the positions that got paid at least before free agency officially starts, and it's a lot of some of these cornerstone positions. We already talked about the quarterback. Some people think wide receiver is one of those cornerstone positions. You saw several offensive linemen get signed, like Weston Richburg and Andrew Norwell. You saw cornerbacks get picked up. You know, in addition, you saw some tight ends as well, where the Falcons are potentially in the market for a potential tight end. We'll see what they do there. But it does seem like teams are prioritizing these sort of cornerstone positions. We didn't really see left tackles. We didn't see pass rushers, but we probably will see that in the coming days. What are your thoughts on that, Emory? And is this just a reflection of sort of teams saying these are the big premium positions, these are the big money positions? If we're going to go out there and make a splash early, we might as well go out there and back up the Brinks truck of money to get some of these premium players.
I think it's interesting when you look at free agency. I forgot who said it earlier, but he made a good point. Talked about, you know, the way teams attack free agency is kind of tied to how they view the draft. You know, we saw a lot of teams go and sign quarterbacks. So what does that say about the depth of the draft class, right? We see teams go out there and solidify offensive lines with giving these large contracts to guys that don't touch the ball. So, you know, what does that say about the depth of the offensive line class? I kind of like that approach for offensive linemen because I feel hesitant throwing a 22-year-old rookie out there versus grown men with grown man strength. You got to kind of grow into that as an offensive lineman. That's why I wish they expand the rosters and draft linemen and let those guys get acclimated to pro strength before throwing them out there, because you throw a rookie out there, it could ruin them. And with the receivers, I think that's huge, especially certain receivers. I like Sammy Watkins. I know people are going to, not agree with that, but I think Watkins going to Kansas City is a good fit. Yeah, I think that's going to be a good fit for him. He played all 16 games last year. Now he's going to have those. When you're a fast guy, something I never had to deal with. You're going to have those fast guy injuries, so soft tissue injuries. So you're going to constantly, strain something, pull something. I get it. I don't understand it because I couldn't do it. But more power to you for being fast. But that's what you get for being fast, right? So I understand that move. And I think when you look at certain I think the biggest thing, the focus has to go guard, center, guard. That's the most important part of the offensive line. We've made a big thing about the outside tackles because when you had guys like Lawrence Taylor coming off the edge, you got to have a left tackle to block those edge rushers. Well, the quarterbacks back then couldn't get out the way. I don't think we have too many video clips of Lawrence Taylor sacking Randall Cunningham, do we? Or Warren Moon, but he has a boatload of sacking Phil Simms, right? That's the thing. So when you look at guards in the guard, interior pressure is key. If you build that part of your offensive line, your offense should be able to have success on both sides. So I like some of the moves. I'm out here, I cover the Giants, so I thought they were going to re-sign Justin Pugh. Did they re-sign Weston Richburg, or where did he end up signing?
San Francisco.
So they lost Pugh, they lost Richburg, they lost out on Noel, and they're trying to go after Nate Solder, which they're probably going to lose out too. But it did bring in Jonathan Stewart. So, whatever that's worth, the Giants need help. Now they need help along the offensive line. If they would have brought those two guys back, I would have been like, okay, that number 2 pick clearly can go to whoever the Browns don't take at 1, whether it's a quarterback, the top quarterback, or Saquon Barkley. But now you might as well, pencil them in for Quentin Nelson, the guard. They need offensive line help in a worse way.
I think you could have Quentin Nelson even play left tackle though.
So now definitely pencil him in because he got some good guys that they have behind him. Some guys that were on the roster last year, some guys like Jessamine Dunker, who was also on the practice squad, but they're not ready to start. But if you got a chance to get like a Quentin Nelson, early, especially when you've swung and missed multiple times in the pre-free agency period, yeah, especially if he can play tackle like you say, I think they have to go get him.
Yeah, I think you brought up some interesting points about the offensive line and where the value of those positions. And I do think to a certain extent, it kind of matters what type of quarterback you have, because you look at a team like Green Bay and they really value the offensive tackles. And I think a lot of that has to do with the playing style of Aaron Rodgers, where when he faces interior pressure, he can just sort of extend outside the pocket and flee the pocket and use his legs. And when you have guys like Balaga and Bakhtiari, that are able to hold up against that edge pressure, it is really effective. And I think that's probably one of the mistakes that Carolina has made, because Cam is kind of that quarterback as well, and they've not really had great tackle play over the years, but they've been really strong up the middle. We'll see if that continues with Norwell leaving and Ryan Khalil potentially retiring or saying he's going to retire after the season. So we'll see about that. But I do think for most teams, with most quarterbacks, particularly teams like the Falcons, the Saints have made this very popular with having a strong interior. When you have more of that pocket quarterback who's not going to necessarily flee the pocket, then having a good interior makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense to really invest in that center guard play. And when we just talked about the quarterbacks, but when you have guys like particularly Josh Allen is probably a good example of a guy that if he goes to a team that has good tackles, that would make sense, because he does like to get outside the pocket and try to make plays, on the move and whatnot. So I think it does depend a lot on your quarterback style, that if you want to invest in those tackles or in those guards, but certainly you do need to invest in your offensive line. And, we'll see what the Falcons do, probably not in free agency, but later on in the show, Emory, I do want to get some of your thoughts on some of these lower key guards in the draft. But let's focus it back on the Falcons. As I mentioned, they are in the tight end market. There's been connected to Ed Dixon, the Carolina Panthers, number 2 tight end. They were also connected to Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Doesn't sound like there's been mixed reports on whether or not the Falcons are serious contenders there. Jason Lockton-Ford said that they are. Some other guy that covers the Jets, I can't think of his name. I apologize to that guy.
Manish Mehta.
I don't think it was Manish Mehta. It was someone, I think it was NJ.com that said it, but I can't remember.
Oh, they were sourcing a Seahawks source, though.
Okay. There you go. So
it's the same Seahawks source that thought Steve Sarkisian was going to be the next offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks.
Okay. But yeah, so we'll see what the Falcons get a tight end in the next day or two, who that is. We also saw Taylor Gabriel sign elsewhere. I'm curious, because we haven't seen sort of the market get set for some of these pass rushers, what that means for a guy like Adrian Claiborne. We've seen a couple of D tackles go. Star Latulele went from Carolina to Buffalo. Elodi Nada went from Detroit to Philadelphia on a 1-year deal. Where that figures in for Dontari Poe's contract, there's been talk about him being a high-value target. Maybe.
How did the Falcons not go after Chris Baker as a replacement for Dontari Poe? That's what I don't get.
Cincinnati pounced on him earlier. You got Sue now in the game. Who knows what's going to happen now?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't hate it if they went after Sue.
They're not going to be able to afford Sue.
They won't. But, I mean, even Benny Logan on a similar deal to what Poe signed last year, but like $6 million instead of $8 million would work.
I'm so glad free agency kind of happened, because I was just about to put out I had just finished on Sunday or Saturday my 7-round mock draft for each team, and lo and behold, all this chaos happens Sunday to Saturday with the Browns, and then through Sunday, and then all this stuff. I'm like, man, now I gotta go hit the draw, like kind of rearrange. So I had a good Falcons mock. I mean, if you guys want to hear it,
sure, go for it.
I'm gonna have to probably add, redo it. But I had you guys taking Maurice Hurst, Jalen Samuels, Kentavious Street, Jamil Demby out of Maine, Chase Litton, quarterback. I think you guys need a better backup quarterback. Grant Haley of Penn State, and Edo Smith of Southern Miss.
Not really a huge fan of taking Jalen Samuels in the second round.
Really?
I am.
I like Jalen Samuels, but a running back in the second round to me.
You're tight end.
He's probably
H-back
receiver.
He's like an H-back receiver. I just don't think that he's got a true position right now in the NFL, and that's kind of the real issue. Like, because honestly think he's more of a running back. Looking at his build, looking at his athleticism, how he can catch the ball at the backfield, like I would take him and use him more like Tevin Coleman than, I don't know, Austin Hooper or even Eric Sobert or like a number 2 tight end. Like I don't see the fit in Atlanta. If you get what I'm saying.
I get you because you kind of have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think they're gonna focus on that guy who can be a strong side defensive end and nickel defensive tackle with one of their top 2 picks, and the other pick is gonna be a big fat plugger. So like a BJ Hill, a Harrison Phillips, Deron Payne if he somehow falls, Vea if he somehow falls, somebody in that range, and then someone who's in that like Rasheem Green, Taven Bryan, like just that kind of mold as for the other one. Like maybe even Jalen Holmes. Did you say Jalen Holmes?
No, I said Contavious Street.
Contavious Street. Contavious Street kind of fits more of that like rotational under tackle. So I mean that's going to be a good pick regardless. And don't get me wrong, Maurice Hurst would be a great pick, assuming that they want Grady to be the nose. But I think they like having him more in that 3 technique last year.
Well, Emory, I liked your mock draft. The Maurice Hurst pick and the Jalen Samuels pick sold me on it. I just kind of zoned out for the rest of it because I was just like, if they make those first 2 picks, I'm good. So,
my favorite pick for you guys was the Street pick. I think Street is awesome. I actually had him as a first round pick for you guys. The way the mock fell.
Okay.
So
right.
I mean, I don't see him as a first round guy, but as that, like I think he's more of like a 5th round guy, and I think that's where you had him too.
Yeah, when you look at like when I saw Street, he's another one of those guys that doesn't really have a position. At the Shrine game, they had him, working as an end. Certain games during the season, he played all across the front for NC State during the season. It's just like, okay, where do you put him? Do you kind of have him as a 3 tech? Do you want him as like a 5 or 4-eye, or maybe you want to stand him up? He's super athletic. I don't know where you play him, but I kind of want him on my team. He kind of like the dude from Ole Miss. He don't have a position. His position defense. I just kind of want him on my team.
Talk about like that,
yeah.
Talk about Haynes.
Oh, okay, Marquise Haynes. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Marquise. Yeah. I have him listed like in my notes as linebacker, but it's like question mark.
Right.
Edge question mark. Like all I know is put him on the field and just figure it out later.
Exactly. I mean, I have Speaks as a 5 tech, but Speaks kind of that same way too. Like, damn, where do I play this dude? Like,
Yeah, that can be an asset for certain guys because it's like you draft them thinking they're going to play one thing, and then they don't play that, and then you move them, and then they find a home there, and you just can sort of just move them across the defensive line or the front 7 to figure out exactly how you look at a guy like Kareem Martin who came out of North Carolina a couple of years ago in Arizona. I think they originally drafted him to be a 3-4 defensive end. Then they slowly started moving him out to the outside. Now he's an outside linebacker in their 3-4. He's a free agent now. But he sort of started to come into his own this past year as a 3-4 outside linebacker and could be sort of an underrated free agent signing for somebody if they sort of view him as this edge player. But his previous experience playing inside does give him some versatility for certain teams. And I think some of these guys, certainly when it comes to defensive linemen, not maybe as much when you play another position like I don't know, maybe not offensive line, even though that I guess is a little valuable. But
this clearly has to be redone now because
think like Rod Coleman.
Huh?
Rod Coleman was drafted as a defensive end, and then he moved to under tackle and made his money as an under tackle.
Exactly. Better example, Scott. Thank you. That's why you're the co-host of this show.
Yeah, I got to redo this because I'm pretty sure now with the way I have the first half of the draft setting up, that none of this is going to be possible. So I gotta go back and readjust some things or adjust some things to.
Well, Here's my thing. Is Taven Bryan available at the Falcons pick in your view?
Yes, he is. He was. I actually had him going to the Vikings.
So
wait, you guys picked before the Vikings, right?
Yeah. We picked before the Vikings. So
Vikings.
I'm going to be honest with you. All the research, all the film I've watched, you know how you kind of watch a prospect and you're like, this Dan Quinn would love this dude. Like, I'm sure you watch an offensive prospect sometimes and you're like, Sean Payton would love this dude. Like, I'm sure you watched Kamara last year and was like,
or like a guy like Nyheim Hines.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you watch Hines and you're like, okay, I don't want him to go to New Orleans because they've already got Kamara. Like, no. So for me, like, I watched Taven Bryan and I'm like, this dude is if Dan Quinn molded his ideal, like, strong side defensive end, nickel defensive tackle prospect and was like, I want this guy. And then he just happened to have slightly shorter arms than ideal. Like, that's Taven Bryan to me. He is raw as hell, but he is athletic as hell. He's explosive off the line. He's great laterally. Like, the only question I have about him is all technique, hands. Like, to me, if the questions I have are stuff that can be taught by talented coaches like Dan Quinn and Bryant Young, I'm going to take the guy in the first round.
That's why I compared his situation to a Malik Collins, when he came out of Nebraska. Those are things you can't teach. Ball get off, hustle. He's always in the backfield.
Yeah.
Finding the ball is a problem, but you can teach him. You could teach him that. You could teach him technique. And Malik Collins, I believe, had like a Pro Bowl season as a rookie, all rookie team. Bryant,
because he had Marinelli,
right? Because again, one of the best D-line coaches. And I hate using the comparison because he's white and played at Florida, but he does kind of remind me of Trace Armstrong. How Trace Armstrong kind of like found his way across the defensive line, balled out at multiple different spots. And I kind of see Bryan doing the same thing. I really like him too.
And that's why I think if you put him with Bryant Young, you put him with Dan Quinn, you could have a what's that guy's name? Mo Wilkerson situation where a guy is drafted at the end of the first round and is a multi-time Pro Bowler and one of the best defensive linemen in the league for years. When he's under that particular coach, I mean, you don't have to teach his motor. You don't have to teach his get off. You have to teach his hands. You can teach hands. You have to teach his technique. You can teach technique. You don't have to teach him leverage, though. If you don't have to teach leverage and it's just hands and technique and finding the ball, that's the guy I want. And I think he's going to be shocked. I have a top 5 grade on him. I think he's one of the top 4 or 5 guys in this draft. Just because everything I see about him is like basically J.J. Watt, but in Derek Wolfe's athleticism.
Derek Wolfe.
Derek Wolfe is a lot more athletic than people give him credit for. It's just he plays in a role where all he's doing is eating a double team or eating a tackle out of the play, so he doesn't get the credit he deserves. But if he was in a different team in a different role, if you used him like a J.J. Watt type role, you could have a much better football player than what they've got.
Yeah, Derek Wolfe, I remember watching him at Cincinnati, and he was just mauling dudes. He was very powerful, still is very powerful. Speaking of Taven Bryan and Derek Wolfe, Emory, I want to get your thoughts on some of these D tackles, particularly some of these under-the-radar guys. You have pretty high grades on guys like Nathan Shepard and Bilal Nichols and P.J. Hall and Kentavious Street. And some of these guys aren't, no one's really talking about these guys as first-round picks. But in that day 2, day 3, early day 3 range, what are your thoughts on some of these guys? I've seen some of Nathan Shepard. I'm really high on him. I hope the Falcons can pull the trigger on him in round 2. I've seen some of Bilal Nichols. I was very impressed with him. I haven't really watched any of P.J. Hall. I've seen Kentavious Street, obviously. But maybe you can give some of your thoughts on some of these, lower-level guys that can potentially come in and make an impact in the NFL.
The reason why I like watching these small school guys, one, because, I am a color commentator, so I do a lot of FCS and PSAC, which is Division II games. So I've seen a lot of these players broadcasting the game. But that aside, I like these small college guys because one, they're going to be in college 4 years, maybe 5, maybe they redshirt. So they're going to get there, and 9 times out of 10, their coaching staff doesn't change. So they get the same coaching, same message, same drills that they get constantly taught over time. So that's why you see a guy like Nathan Stewart have so much technique, and so all of these guys are going to be strong in their technique, right? When you look at a PJ Hall out of Sam Houston State, he was a 4-time All-American. And so you don't really see that. He was a freshman All-American, true freshman, and also was one of the nation's best in blocking kicks. So he has tremendous athleticism. And over time, he started out as a 5 tech, and then they kind of pushed him inside. Then they started to move him out. You saw him stand up a little bit this year for Sam Houston State. But his home is in the middle, from 1 to the shade to the 3. He can do it all. But I like Hall because he has that dog that you want from a defensive tackle. That dude will consistently bring it. When he knows he has you, it's over. He's gonna set up shop in the backfield throughout the rest of the game. So he's real good with his hands, as most of these small school guys are. Same with Bilal Nichols. I like how Bilal Nichols is able to play multiple spots. We talked about Taven Bryan playing everywhere across the defensive line. Nichols is the same way. He's 6'4", about 290, but you can see him function as a strong side defensive end, all the way down to a nose or even a 5 tech. He's good technically. He has good ball get off, and also shows a little bit of pass rush moves. That's why when you saw him at defensive end, you're like, man, this dude really can hold his own. He has good moves to really get to the quarterback. So I think for him, it's all about pad level a little bit. But for the most part, he's a really good player. And the other guy I have, a small school guy I'm looking at my D tackle list here, Abdullah Anderson out of Bucknell. He was another one that I actually interviewed him because I do a lot of Patriot League games. I do the Georgetown games. So I've seen him throughout the years. And he was talking about how he came into Bucknell as 235-pounder. He only played 1 year of high school football, so he had to get up to speed over the summer, put on 30 pounds of muscle. He was a basketball player and first team All Patriot League as a true freshman, with only 1 year playing high school football, and has been 2-time All-American, 4-time All Patriot League, and he's 6'4", 295 now, and he can play anywhere along the defensive line, and so he's another one that has good athleticism. And I like their coach, Joe Susan, the head coach over there at Bucknell, because he's big in martial arts. And so he teaches these guys, like, from a martial arts standpoint, technique, because he was an all-conference defense or offensive lineman when he played at Delaware back in the late 70s, early 80s with Rich Gannon, those guys. So I know he's teaching good technique over there, but Abdullah Anderson is one to keep an eye on too. A guy that can play in the 3-4, 4-3, anywhere along the front, because he's good technically. He has good ball get off, and he also does a great job in getting after the quarterback. So I know I said that for like the other 3, but they do have all that same ability that they bring to the table.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people expect the Falcons to pull the trigger on a D tackle in round 1, which they certainly is definitely a possibility, if not a probability. But I think one of the benefits of this draft class, particularly with some of these small school guys that I have seen, and some of the ones that I haven't, and as well as some of the guys that come from the Power 5 conferences as well, I think it's a really deep D tackle class. And I think with the Falcons right now where they're sitting, and I think a lot of people are expecting them to make a splash in free agency to shore up their defensive line, and they might wind up doing that. But I do think even if they go into the draft needing to get 3 or 4 guys to fill out their rotation, they'll have the opportunity to do so on all 3 days of the draft, just because I think this draft class is so deep with solid players that can come in, not only with some of the first-round guys and early round guys that can be true difference makers, but I also think you're going to get a lot of solid rotational pieces that you can sort of build a really strong defense around for many, many years to come. I want to switch sides of the ball and talk about some of the interior offensive linemen, particularly the guards that you have that are some of these guys. We talk quite a bit about the Isaiah Wynns and the Will Hernandezes and the Quentin Nelsons and whatnot, but maybe some of these guys that are a little bit under the radar that you have highly rated. A guy like Tony Adams is a guy that I've been impressed with when I've seen him at NC State. I've only seen a little bit of Dijon Allen from Hawaii, but he's a guy that intrigues me. I know you have Braden Smith as your number one guard. I think you have Isaiah Wynn as your number two guy. But there's a couple other guys that you had in your top 10 that I'm curious about that I honestly, until I saw your rankings, I had never even heard of them, in Trenton Scott and Will House. Do you think those are guys that could potentially fit in Atlanta with their sort of zone blocking scheme? And am I going to have to add two more names to my watch list before the draft comes?
I think Trenton Scott could be. He played left tackle at Grambling, but he's going to be a guard. I was at the Celebration Bowl this year when they played North Carolina A&T, and if Grambling wins that game, Trenton Scott is the MVP. You know, he was dominating up front for Grambling. They just had a better, team on the other side in A&T who had a premier left tackle in Brandon Parker. So I think Trenton Scott, with his athleticism, they use him on a lot of traps too from that tackle spot and use him to pull around and lead and things of that nature. So I think for sure he can do so in Atlanta. He's probably going to be an undrafted guy. Will House out of Southern Nazarene. This is another player that I think is his first. When guys hit you up on Twitter or Instagram to check out their film, you want to. They send you their highlights, right? So you want to be intrigued enough by their highlights that you go out to the coach and request full game film. And when I was watching Will House's highlights, it didn't make sense. It was like, this looked like it's played in fast speed. There's no way he's moving as fast. There's no way he's blowing up these guys. You know how Alex Kappa's tape looked? That's how Will House tape looked consistently throughout the tape. I'm like, man, this dude is legit quick for a guard. So I think he's another one that could fit, but he's another one that's one of those guys who's going to probably be an undrafted guy that if he wants to have a sustained career, I think signing with a team like Atlanta would be great. So I think those two guys you really have to watch out. Be interested to get you guys' take on those two players.
So one of the guys that I noticed while I was watching some film this year was Skylar Phillips out of Idaho State. Dude was flying around the field. Then he kind of explodes in the combine, and it's like, all right, he's not really a secret anymore. I was shocked he weighed as much as he did at the combine. He doesn't look like he's 325 pounds on the field, but I mean, dude was flying. And I think if you're looking at like a 4th or 5th round guy who legitimately could be drafted by the Falcons, what are your thoughts on him and his fit in the zone scheme?
I think that's a good fit because, one thing I also like about being a lot familiar with these small college guys is being familiar with the conferences. So I know what they're going to get. Like with the Big Sky Conference, he's going to see a lot of pass rush, right? Because they throw the ball a lot. And they run the run game is essentially inside outside zone. So he's very good on the move, very good on his feet. And you saw him down at the Senior Bowl really put together a good week of work too. So I think that's a guy that say a draftable guy. He's at the combine that the Falcons could be targeting. But always when you look at these small school guys, you look at I even do it with the Power 5 guys. That's how we grade. We tend to do best game, worst game, best possible matchup or intriguing matchup. And when you know the conferences that they play in, you tend to know I'd rather watch this game because I know they're going to get this defense or this particular offensive style. And that's what, when you look at the FCS, the Big Sky, you're going to get pass rush. And it's good to see how these guys are able to hold their own against guys that they're going to see a lot of blitzes. They're going to see a lot of unique stunts. So how can they create more so than you see it in the SWAC too, in the MEAC, not mostly in the MEAC, but mostly in the SWAC, the pass rush, because they're going to throw the ball 95 times a game. So you're going to get a good idea of what your tackle or guard can do based off the teams that they play in their conference.
Emory, I know you had Braden Smith as your number one guard over, say, even Isaiah Wynn or Quentin Nelson on your rankings. Scott and I were talking about Braden Smith. My one concern with Braden Smith is I don't really love that Auburn run game in terms of what it asks its offensive linemen to do. They run a lot of inside zone there, which is certainly projects to the next level. But some of the other stuff that they do, I don't necessarily think, particularly with the Falcons, I won't say for other NFL teams because I don't study NFL teams blocking schemes like that. But I know with the Falcons, with as much outside zone they do, it doesn't always sort of translate. But I'm very curious. What are your thoughts on Braden Smith? Why do you think he's the best guard prospect? And something that Scott and I discussed last week's show after the combine when we were recapping the combine is we talked about with his height that maybe some teams could look at him as a tackle. What are your thoughts on that?
I love his athleticism, number one. And I like how you brought up a good point about their offense. Because when you have a situation like that, let's say like Army with the tackle prospect they had this year, right?
Oh, man.
Yeah, you tend to extrapolate what they can do and ignore the offense. So with Smith, I like how he moves. I like how, he finds work, as they like to say. I like how his hands stay inside. He keeps his feet moving, and if you find him in a traditional pass set, I think he does a good job in like we used to say in college, playing the piano, so he's gonna be able to, go side to side, keep his hands inside and pass guys off, and so that's why I like him more than Quentin Nelson, who's like, if Nelson gets his hands on you, it's over. But he's not the best athlete, in my opinion. Just like Will Hernandez. If he gets his hands on you, it's over. But he's not the best athlete. But I think Braden Smith does a lot of things well. And you just kind of ignore the offense. And to make the case against a guy for Army, I don't think he moves well enough to where you can say, like, just from a stereotype standpoint, you say, okay, he's playing the option offense. Their offensive linemen have to be quick. They have to be able to move. He should be able to do that. But that's not the case with him, so you don't see that on film. Plus, he doesn't play with good leverage, which is tough for a guy that tall to do. But you can see all that despite him playing in that option offense. But on the flip side with Braden Smith, I kind of like how he moves and how he blocks. And think if I'm thinking like a coach, I'm thinking, okay, he has those pieces. I can get him to do things from a technical standpoint that I need him to do.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I love Braden Smith's traits. It's just when you're going to draft him as high as he's probably going to get drafted in the top 50 or so, you often don't want to see as much of a learning curve with those guys as he's trying to adjust to the pro game. And that's my only concern with Braden Smith. But whoever winds up drafting him, whether it's a team like the Giants or somebody like that, I think it's going to get a very good player. In 5 years from now, all this talk of like the Auburn offense translating is not going to matter as much because he'll have gotten NFL coaching for 5 years. But in terms of his ability to translate quickly, I do think there's a little bit of a learning curve, and that's why I give the edge to some of these other guys at guard.
Talking about moving guys around the offensive line, one of the guys I've been watching recently is Joseph Noteboom out of Texas Christian. I don't know if you've seen him or studied him gone in depth on him, but I really would love to see what he could do inside at left guard. He's 6'5", 310. He's got 34-inch arms. He's real athletic laterally. I mean, he's definitely a tackle when you look at his athleticism and you look at his overall numbers there, but I just want to see what he could do as a pass protector inside, what he could do as a run blocker inside. Just because I feel like Texas Christian, the passing game, you do have that. You can see in the passing game he's a decent pass blocker, but in the run game, I don't get how well it translates.
Yes, and I try to talk to Kyle Hicks at the combine about the running game, just to pick his brain a little bit to see what he says. He was saying, it's a lot of quick stuff. So and you're right. When you have that essentially as the basis of your running game, it's kind of tough to get a gauge on how this guy can run block. I mean, I have him as my 23rd tackle for what it's worth, right? But I graded him out as like a 68. So he's on the cusp of being a 70, which is a solid NFL starter. So I think he's going to be a good rotational piece, and then grow into that role of being a solid starter. So because of those questions you mentioned, and I just got that verification from Hicks out there at the combine on how their running game was, just to make sure I wasn't looking at it from a different lens and misreading it, so it's always tough from these, especially these Big 12, offense.
Can we get some competent coordinators in the Big 12? Like, can we get like Kyle Shanahan's bastard child in the Big 12 and just let him have some fun with like Baker Mayfield Jr. and like these guys? Because the people they have just don't work. Go to bed, Molly.
I tell you what though, if they really want to affect college football, just move the hash marks in closer, and all things will change.
You know what I think they should do? Give me a pro style field for college football, and pay the players so they can sell their own likenesses. Like, you don't have to pay the players from the colleges, but just let them sell their own likenesses to ESPN. What's 10 grand a year for every college football player who sells his likeness, or like EA Sports, EA Sports. They've got the money.
It's a shame how you see how bad it was where they quickly stopped the game rather than pay the players. Like instantly stop production on a game. That's crazy.
They have the money to pay the players, and that's the aggravating piece of it.
Yeah. Let's move on, and we're going to get into our mailbag questions. And we appreciate, Emory, for you hanging out with us for as long as you have. This is the section of the show where we do the call-outs of the week. This is where Scott and I usually have something to rant about. I don't have anything to say. Emory will let Scott go on his rant, and then if you have anything that's grinding your gears, then by all means you can go on. Scott, you have the floor.
The Atlanta Falcons fans who are just Austin Hooper truthers, where they're like, this guy's never going to be good because he dropped 6 balls this year. They were just the timing of those passes of when his drops were sucked. Do I agree that he probably needs work on his hands? Of course. I think he should spend as much time with Matt Ryan in the offseason getting his hands, upgraded as well as you can. And he needs to sit there every single day from now until opening day of the season with a jugs machine. And then from here on out until his retirement every single day, the way Tony Gonzalez did, just catching 100 balls a day on top of everything else he did. And that extra 100 balls catching, so that it's like second nature. And he just knows catch. And he's got his technique perfectly. Because I feel like if you put in the work and it's second nature, at that point, it's just putting the ball near him. And you've got a guy who's going to, you're going to have a guy who's going to be a Pro Bowler. He'll have 80 catches for 950 yards and 7 touchdowns. And of his 7 touchdowns, 5 will be in the red zone. And you'll have a guy who looks like the guy that Aaron and I, because I know Aaron was telling me about him long before I even watched him, because I didn't think he was going to come out back in 2016 because he was a redshirt sophomore. So I was like, I'm not even going to watch him. And Aaron's like, no, watch this guy. I think he's going to be an Atlanta Falcon in 2019 whenever he comes out of Stanford. And lo and behold, he was right. And like, Aaron, am I wrong here in thinking that he's got that kind of potential?
Yeah, I mean, I like Hooper. I see him more as a Kyle Rudolph type than, on that peak potential. But, I don't think anybody in Minnesota is complaining about Kyle Rudolph's ability.
I mean, I think you get a Jason Witten type is really what you're getting out of him as a best case scenario. And if you look at his rookie year and last year and compare it to Witten's rookie year and just go from there, you're fine. I mean, yeah, he does really compare to Kyle Rudolph's first 2 years. I agree with you, but Rudolph also got injured quite a bit in the 13, 14, 15, which did bring him down. And even then, when he was fully healthy in 16, he had 80 catches, 840 yards, 7 touchdowns. It's not a stretch to expect something similar out of Austin Hooper. It's really not. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be every single year, but in peak years, getting that kind of production, if he hits his potential, you're good. You don't need a starting tight end. Hell, if you get Kyle Rudolph, you don't need Kyle Rudolph potential. You don't need a starting tight end. You just need a good tight end who can block in the run game and be a good outside option for Ryan.
There you go. Emory, is there anything that you feel the need to call out tonight?
I think I've spent the last month and a half talking about DeShone Kizer and how unfairly he was treated in Cleveland. So I'm not going to go on a rant about that. I think I've said my piece. It's funny how they ship him out and all of a sudden they bring in all this help and weapons, right, for the next guy. But they could have did that with a guy that was playing up and down, that, you know, you build confidence with him. He still got talent. Now you have even better talent around him, and he should be better. The Browns, I thought, panicked, got rid of him. Now they're going to create this whole process all over again, man. Like, it's a shame. And the only way they can rectify this is by taking both Barkley and Lamar Jackson. If they do that, then all is forgiven. Kizer, they did right by him by trading him to Green Bay. I think he'll be fine there because it shows that a team actually saw what happened last year, thought he had value, wanted him, and was willing to trade a player to bring him in. So I'm not going to go too deep on the rant about that, but I just think DeShone Kizer just got a bad rap last year. And we've seen multiple average to terrible quarterbacks get $20+ million these past 2 days to be their guy. Like, people paid Glennon, you know, after just watching him like lose 2 jobs in a row. Like, I don't get it. So shout out to DeShone Kizer, shout out to Green Bay, and shout out to the Browns if they do the right thing.
I think I was kind of hoping the Falcons were going to trade for DeShone Kizer with like a 7th or, you know, even something that they didn't need. I can't think of a player, but like, I don't know, maybe Brooks Reed for DeShone Kizer. Like, it upgrades the Falcons' backup quarterback. It lets Kizer have mentors in Schaub and Ryan. It gives him a coach in Greg Knapp who knows how to talk to quarterbacks. And then whenever Ryan's gone, you have a guy who's like 27 at most, and you've got 14 years of DeShone Kizer.
It's crazy, man. Like, you see it with certain, like, they took him in the 2nd round. They passed up, you know. I always had this thing with Browns fans. It's funny to see them now say, oh, you got to take a quarterback. Take your guy at number 1. Like, okay, fine. I agree with you. What was this same energy last year? Oh, no, you got to take the DN. Like, no, take the quarterback if it's the most important thing.
To be fair, there's a lot of stupid Browns fans. They are from Cleveland. If you aren't smart enough to leave Cleveland, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, outside of like Pete Smith, I don't even think that dude lives in Cleveland anymore. Like, you know, our friend Pete. Like, come on, man.
I'll tell you what, though.
The entire time he was saying, you know, I think they should take Watson, but they're going to screw it up and take Kizer. I think they should take this guy, but they're going to screw it up. Because he's been a Browns fan for so long.
They screwed up by taking Garrett. I always say this, like, you can't.
I disagree.
You can't game the draft. You know, you got to take the guy who handles the ball. I want all the touchdowns. I want all the sacks. I want all the interceptions. Garrett wasn't that dude that they're making him out to be. Take the quarterback, because if you try to wait and play, or I'm going to trade up or try to wait, he's going to fall. All chaos happens.
I think with Garrett, though, you're getting a Michael Strahan part 2. And at number 1 overall, you can get away with that. When you have the 12th overall pick in a year and you're trying to play the inefficiency, if you understand the market inefficiency is black quarterbacks get underdrafted for fucking stupid reasons of racist coaches, they do. They get underdrafted, and there's no point for it. So you have black quarterbacks getting underdrafted like Deshaun Watson. You should have never gone 12. He's sitting there at 12 for you. You can have your cake in Myles Garrett and eat it too. Do it. Don't trade down from 12 just because you're being an idiot. And Sashi Brown was being an idiot.
But he made up for it by taking Kizer, which was fine. They also didn't have to take David Njoku because they had set the valve on that roster already. And so I just think that it worked out for them. They lucked into it, working out for them, getting a young quarterback prospect like that. But they just gave up on him too quickly. And I just think that the football gods and football karma are undefeated. So we'll see if it works out, if they do the right thing. But with the way this free agency is going, they're going to burn up all the little money. And I think if they draft Josh Allen, I'm just, the football guys will once again be undefeated.
I can't wait to see who drafts Josh Allen. That's the thing I'm most excited to see. What team gets Josh Allen? What team gets Lamar Jackson?
If the Browns go Josh Allen, they deserve everything that they're ever going to get, because they are. I mean, if you just want that tall white quarterback, there you go. There's Josh Allen.
There's a bunch
if you want a talented quarterback, you go with anybody else.
And for the record, I love Cleveland. By the way, Cleveland are underrated, like a city to hang out in. Like
Cleveland, as long as Hugh Jackson is the coach, though. Hugh Jackson is killing that franchise. And for me to say that someone is killing the Browns, like, how do you make the Browns worse? They were 4-12 the year before he got there, and like 3-13 the year before that, and he somehow brought the worst team in the league, like. Worse. Like, they went from here, which is like awful, to here, which is might actually lose to the Crimson Tide if Hugh Jackson is coaching that game. Not because the Crimson Tide has better talent, but because Nick Saban would wipe the floor with Hugh Jackson as a head coach.
All right. So we had especially good call-outs this week. All right, let's move on to the mailbag and wrap this show up. Ryan Grote at XRyan on Twitter asks, what are the chances that Hurst falls to us in the draft?
I'm going to go with 100%, especially after that janky heart condition thing that they said he has. I mean, if the Michigan doctors found it and thought it was a real issue, they would have told him about it ahead of time. I don't think it's a legitimate thing that's going to stop him now, but maybe when his third contract hits him the way it did for Fairley.
I agree. He'll be there.
We'll see what happens. I mean, Starla Tulele had the same issue. He still got drafted in the top 20. Fairley, I think, got drafted in the top 20 as well. So it'll be depending on how teams see it. Like, some teams may see it as a major issue. Some teams might not. I would, at this point in time, I would assume that more teams than not will see it as an issue. So I think there's a pretty good chance he's there at pick 26. And if, we'll see whether the Falcons pull the trigger on that, if it's an issue for them or they don't, and we'll see if he's there in the second round as well. Derek Hunter at D-Rock the Party asks, how would you feel if we drafted Josh Sweat from Florida State in the first?
I get watching a guy just destroy the combine and post up numbers that are comparable to what Vic Beasley and those guys did. Like, I get seeing that and going, oh my God, this guy's amazing. But at the same time, his film doesn't back it up. And the Falcons have their two main edges right now to where you can wait until later rounds and get the right guy. I mean, athletically, there's not too much difference between Kylie Fitz and Josh Sweat, except Fitz is 265 pounds and might be a better fit for your strong side end role in the third round, as opposed to taking Sweat and overdrafting him in the first. No one's talking about Kylie Fitz. He ran a 4.69, but he's a defensive end. His 1.6, 110 split, his 6.88 cone, those are numbers I look at and I go, man, this guy's fast, athletic, and you see it on film. So, I mean, for me, I'd rather take Kylie Fitz in the third, have that guy who can play a strong side end, than take Josh Sweat in the first round.
For me, I like Josh Sweat a lot. I think there's a lot of elements of his game that are similar to Takk McKinley. But my core philosophy when it comes to defensive team building in particular is that when you put together the defense and you're putting together, 24, 25 players on your defense, you basically want everybody on that unit to do different things. And I think when you double dip like that and you get guys that basically fill the same roles, you're always going to have to marginalize probably one of those guys because, you know, if you have Tack McKinley and you have Josh Sweat who does basically the same thing that Tack does, you know, okay, do you play them both at the same time? Okay, well, if you do that, then where's Vic Beasley playing? So I just think with Josh Sweat, even though I think he'll probably go somewhere between pick 25 and pick 40 or something like that, you know, maybe to a team like Tampa Bay and be a problem for us for many, many years to come. I just don't think there's really a whole lot of room on the Falcons roster unless they're going to basically draft Josh Sweat with the idea of we're going to make Vic Beasley a permanent linebacker, and that's all he's going to play, and he'll occasionally rush the quarterback. But if that's not the case, then I don't see the upside of taking a good player like Josh Sweat. So, Emory, do you have any thoughts on Josh Sweat?
I just watching him, man, and seeing him in high school and then watching him throughout college, I just don't think he's the same player, man. I really don't think he's fully confident in that knee, you know? I know he's worked out well. I just don't see it on film from him. I think he's going to end up being a decent rotational pro, like a guy that's going to have like a 7-year career, but it's going to be nondescript. I just don't. It's unfortunate because that injury really took away what made him special. It's kind of like how I felt about DeMarco Murray, where if you go back and watch him in high school, this dude like was ridiculous. And then he had them knee injuries going into Oklahoma, and it just took his explosiveness away. He still was fast, but you watched him, you like, he's not the same. You know, and I feel the same way about Sweat.
Yeah, I remember young DeMarco Murray at Oklahoma. He was amazing, and then he got hurt and kept getting hurt, and you know the rest was history. Our last question comes from Mabe2124. He says, "Does the current news on the team, the Falcons, and cap status lead us toward guard or defensive tackle with the first round pick?"
So I'm gonna go with it's gonna lead us toward defensive tackle. Because if you look at who's under contract right now for the Falcons on the offensive line, you have all 5 starters returning. You have all 4 of the guys who played as backups returning. And then you have practice squatter Daniel Brunskill returning. So basically the entire offensive line from last year is coming back this year. And it was a group that was one of the better ones in the league last year. So, yeah, while it'd be great, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't hate the idea of upgrading on Schweitzer, even though I think Schweitzer is a solid football player. I wouldn't hate the idea of bringing in Levitre's backup, like eventual replacement. Do you have to get that guy right away in the top 3 rounds, or can you take a guy in the 4th or the 6th round like Skylar Phillips? Honestly, I'm going to lean towards the latter and hope that Skylar Phillips, you take him in the 4th, and he becomes that guy, and you just have a lot more bulk in the middle of the line than what you have with Levitre, what you had with Levitre and Chester, guys that can pass block but are athletic, like Schweitzer and Phillips, and then have them be just better pass protectors. And I think the Falcons long-term would look like a smarter team doing that. And it'd be – I compare it to like the Packers taking college left tackles and moving them inside the guard like TJ Lang, like Josh, what's the guy's name? Josh Sitton. You know, and having those guys be long-term solutions at guard in a zone blocking scheme. Take college tackles, move them to guard, have the speed, have the athleticism, and have the pass blocking ability.
Emory, do you have any thoughts on this year's guard versus D tackle class and maybe where the value is for a team like the Falcons?
I mean, if one of those top guards falls, yeah, you kind of pull the trigger, right? But you kind of game in the draft because you're at that point where do I take one of these good guards or do I try to take one of these top D tackles, seeing who could fall, you know, possibly the pick 52, I believe, when y'all pick in the 2nd round?
58.
58. So it's like, that's a tough spot because, I think you got to go where you feel as though your strongest need is. And, sounds like it's defensive line. So I would say take the defensive tackle, find a solid veteran guard to sign via free agency.
Yeah, I think the smart money as D tackle is probably the safer bet here. But as I said earlier, I think this draft class is deep enough at D tackle that if the Falcons did like a guard that was there at pick 26, they should have no problems pulling the trigger on that guy and then just going D tackle heavy over the next 2 or 3 picks and sort of filling out the rotation there, because I do think they're going to be able to find good value. I think you're going to be able to find solid guys that can play that 3 technique. You can find guys that can play that 1 technique. You can find guys that can play that 5 technique as well. So I don't feel like the Falcons need to panic and pick a D tackle just because it's their biggest need in round 1. But it just really depends on who's there. And, picking so late in the first round, it's hard to guess who's going to slide in the draft. There's always a couple of guys that you always pegged as, top 15, top 20 picks that slide into the 20s. No one thought they would be there, and someone could pull the trigger on that guy. And there's always a couple of guys that you thought, oh, there's no chance that he goes in the top 20. Someone winds up taking him at pick 13 or something like that. And it always creates this madness and this shuffle and this jumble at the top of the draft, and we'll see how it goes. So I think the Falcons have the ability to be flexible, but I do think right now, looking at it, yeah, I think D tackle is probably the safer bet for where they would go in the first round.
So I want to kind of go over this situation with you then, Aaron. I was looking at the Falcons roster, and I was looking at what I did in Vance Meeks called Bad Mock Number 1. And in the first round, I took Taven Bryan. In the second round, I took Trenton Thompson. And then B.J. Hill was sitting there in the third round. And I was like, I can't pass this guy up. So when you look at the current roster right now, if you did have a draft like that, why wouldn't that be a good thing?
Yeah, I can't blame you. I'm with you. I'm with you on the Schweitzer thing. I think Schweitzer's fine. I do think there are certain guards in this draft class that if the Falcons drafted that guy, they are better than Schweitzer, because obviously Schweitzer was a 6th-round pick. And so I do think there are guys that are potential upgrades. And so if the Falcons have a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th-round grade on a guard.
You can't use that Schweitzer was a 6th-round pick, so there's probably guys better than him. Ryan Schrader was an undrafted free agent and is one of the top 5 right tackles in the league.
Yeah, but until Schweitzer becomes that type of guard, we can assume that if you have a 3rd-round grade on a guard, you look at that guy as someone who's better than what you thought Wes Schweitzer was 2 years ago. Again, I'm not trying to sit here and be like the Falcons have to take a guard in the first couple of rounds, but I'm just saying, like, if we get to a point and there's a guy with a 3rd-round grade and he's on the board and they don't have anybody that's clearly better than they're on their draft board at another position, there's no reason not to pull the trigger on that guy and see what he turns into. But to answer your question, if the Falcons went D-line heavy in their first 3 picks, or 3 out of their first 4 picks, or whatever the case may be, I'm not going to complain about that. Again, I think the biggest holes on this roster are they need a blocking tight end, they need a fullback, and they need a defensive tackle, and they need a bunch of defensive linemen to help fill out their rotation. You're not going to draft a fullback, or boy, I hope they don't draft a fullback unless it's Jalen Samuels. You're not going to really find a blocking tight end because everybody plays a spread system in college. So if you're going to get a blocking tight end, you're going to get that in free agency. So in reality, in terms of pressing holes that the Falcons have, it's D linemen. They can get a backup cornerback. They can get a backup wide receiver. They can add some depth at linebacker, but those are all positions that they can address on the 3rd day of the draft. So as far as your strategy goes, Scott, I wouldn't be against it at all, and I'd actually applaud it in a lot of ways. So, guys, there you have it. All right, we appreciate everybody for tuning in. Emory, we appreciate you for hanging in with us for an hour and a half. I know that couldn't be easy on you. But let the people know where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find all your rankings and whatnot, and any of the stuff that you got coming up between now and the draft.
Well, they can follow me on Twitter at FBallGamePlan. And All of our draft content is on our website and also on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/football game plan. Our prospect rankings at footballgameplan.com/FBGP scouting. And tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, live on the Fantasy Sports Network, you'll see me co-hosting the Football Game Plan Scout Team Draft Show. It's going to go from 2 to 4. We're going to strictly focus on the offense. And then next week, we'll do defense. So it's going to be a great show, some great guests, some great content, talking prospects, Fantasy Sports Network 2 to 4. You can find it on Fantasy Sports Twitter handle. It'll be on their YouTube Live. It'll be also on Facebook Live, Twitch. I just found out what that is at Fantasy Sports Network, and also on Twitter. You can watch it all across the board. So should be a lot of fun, 2 to 4. So check me out talking NFL draft stuff in studio.
All right, Emory, we appreciate that. If people want to hit us up, I am on Twitter at FalFan. Scott is at Karasik S. You can, of course, follow Pro Football Central on Twitter as well at PF Central. You can find all the links to this podcast, where you can find it on iTunes, the audio version of this at profootballcentral.com. Of course, you can subscribe to Scott's channel as well as the Pro Football Central channel on YouTube. Give us a like while you're doing so. Subscribe to us on YouTube. You can go to lockedonfalcons.com and find my 7-round mock draft projection for the Falcons, factoring in, before free agency hits, and it completely changes the landscape of that. I did have the Falcons taking Taven Bryan in the first round, so you guys might want to go check that out again. That's lockedonfalcons.com. Until then, we will be back probably next week to review any moves that the Falcons have made in free agency, get your thoughts on that, and continue to talk about how it affects their upcoming draft class as well.